Imagine for a second that you wake up tomorrow morning.
Just a normal day.
Right, just a regular morning. But the foundation of your entire modern life has been completely shaken.
Like your morning commute.
Yeah, your commute, the digital connections you rely on for work, even the supply chains that stock your local grocery store. Imagine all of it just being disrupted.
And not because of a natural disaster or anything.
Exactly. Not by anything you did or even anything your government did, but because of a geopolitical dispute happening, thousands of miles away.
It's a scary thought.
It is. But for any nation heavily dependent on imported energy, that scenario isn't just some thought experiment. It's a daily looming reality.
It really is the defining vulnerability of our modern globalized system.
Yeah.
I mean, when a country relies on external forces just to keep the lights on and the engines running, its entire economy is essentially held hostage.
Held hostage to global stability.
Exactly. And as we've seen repeatedly over the last few decades, global stability is incredibly fragile.
Which brings us directly to the mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring a fascinating blueprint for a nation's ultimate independence.
The sources on the table today are really something else.
They are. We're looking at two compelling documents by Ryan Baidia, a PhD and MBA from the Takshila Foundation. The first is an essay titled Bharat at Another Great Turning.
And the second is highly actionable.
Yeah. A highly detailed policy memorandum dated today, March 8, 2026. And this is addressed directly to the Prime Minister and key ministries of India.
These documents, they function as a strategic playbook. The author doesn't just diagnose the problem of energy dependence, which a lot of people do. He actually offers a sweeping, deeply methodical solution to it.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core concept here is India, or Bharat, as the text frequently refers to the nation making a monumental shift, going from energy vulnerability to energy sovereignty.
Right.
And Baidia makes it clear very early on that we shouldn't view this simply through an environmental lens. This is fundamentally about national survival and economic resilience.
To really understand the gravity of that claim, we have to look at the global context the author explicitly lays out.
The immediate triggers.
Yeah. The text points directly to recent turmoil involving Iran, the United States, Israel, and the wider Middle East. It also highlights the continuing instability surrounding Venezuelan oil flows.
Right. The sources actually cite early 2026 Reuters reports showing that Indian refiners had to rapidly expand their Venezuelan crude purchases.
Which is key, because that wasn't necessarily a strategic choice.
It was reactionary.
Exactly. It was a reactionary move forced by shifting U.S. sanctions and export flows.
That perfectly illustrates the sheer lack of control. Energy exposure isn't just influenced by actual physical wars in West Asia.
No, it's dictated by sanctions policies, external power struggles, geopolitical bargaining.
Things that India has absolutely no say in. And for you, the listener, understanding this context is so crucial. Energy isn't just the electricity that charges your phone or cools your home. It's the lifeblood of heavy industry, defense, agriculture, transportation.
It dictates whether a nation's economy is ready to break at the next global shock, or if it's insulated from those external forces.
And the author argues that India has actually faced this exact type of existential threat before and successfully engineered its way out of it.
What's fascinating here is the historical parallel the sources draw. They make a direct analogy between the current energy crisis and the historical food security crisis.
The Green Revolution.
Right. If you look back at the decades right after independence, India faced massive food insecurity. The nation was heavily dependent on imported grain just to feed its population.
A literal ship-to-mouth existence.
Exactly. But through agricultural reform, the application of science, and sheer national resolve, India sparked the Green Revolution and achieved broad food grain self-sufficiency.
The text uncovers a broader historical pattern here, too. It points out that whenever India faces strategic denial or intense external pressure, the nation tends to internalize that pressure and build its own capabilities.
The food crisis was one example, yes.
But the author points to several others from the realms of technology and defense. Like when advanced supercomputing capabilities were denied to India in the 1980s due to fears of dual-use technology, the nation didn't just retreat.
They built their own.
They launched CDEX, the Center for Development of Advanced Computing, and the Param Initiative. They proved they could build their own indigenous supercomputers from scratch.
And a very similar resolve built India's nuclear, missile, satellite, and advanced defense capabilities. The overarching lesson the author draws from these historical precedents is really clear.
That sovereignty without actual physical capability is an illusion.
Right, you simply cannot rest your national strength permanently on the export policies or the goodwill of other nations.
Which completely shifts how we need to view renewable energy in this specific context. Baidia is arguing for what he literally calls an energy sovereignty Marshall Plan for Bharat.
A massive undertaking.
He suggests treating energy independence with the exact same wartime preparation and developmental focus as space capability or food security. But, calling something a Marshall Plan sounds great on paper.
Executing it is another story.
Exactly. Executing top-down infrastructure on that colossal scale in a massive, geographically and politically diverse democracy like India is notoriously difficult. How does the memo actually propose getting this done without it just collapsing under its own weight?
That is where the strategy shifts from rhetoric to a highly sophisticated, pragmatic approach. The author recognizes that a one-size-fits-all mandate from the central government just wouldn't work.
It never does.
No. Instead, the policy memo leans heavily into geography. The argument is that nature has already assigned different strengths and different roles to different Indian regions.
Map the infrastructure to the geography.
Exactly. The strategic goal is to map the infrastructure to what nature is already doing rather than fighting against it.
Here's where it gets really interesting because the text breaks down this geographic mapping in incredible detail.
It does. Let's look at Western India first.
Specifically states like Gujarat and Rajasthan. The memo designates this entire area as the solar frontier.
Because of the landscape.
Right. These states possess vast stretches of arid land, semi-arid scrubland, and deserts. Because of the extremely high solar radiation and the low agricultural productivity of that land, it is absolutely perfect for ultra-large solar parks.
And massive solar-wind hybrid projects.
Yeah. It effectively becomes the great frontier for bulk daytime power generation.
Moving from the deserts, the author then looks at coastal India. India's long coastline is treated as a major strategic asset, specifically for wind energy.
Offshore wind.
Yes. Official planning cited in the text from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy identifies the most advanced offshore wind potential off the coasts of Gujarat and Tamil Nadu.
Why offshore specifically?
Offshore wind is crucial because the capacity factors, meaning the consistency and the strength of the wind, are generally much higher over the ocean than on land. So the coast transforms from just a trade gateway into a massive energy frontier.
So the geography dictates where the bulk of the power is generated, but that introduces a harsh reality of physics that anyone following renewables knows well.
The intermittency problem.
Yeah, solar and wind are inherently intermittent. The sun sets and the wind eventually dies down. So how does the blueprint account for a windless night, or say, a week of heavy monsoon cloud cover?
That brings us to a totally different geographic zone. The Northeast, specifically Arunachal Pradesh and the adjoining Himalayan river system.
The mountains.
Right. The text emphasizes that the Northeast should not be viewed as a primary wind or solar belt, but as the hydro and balancing pillar. This region holds a major share of India's hydropower potential. Strategically, this is vital for balancing the national grid.
And we should clarify for the listener how that balancing actually works, especially with technologies like pumped storage hydropower.
It is an ingenious mechanism. Essentially, a pumped storage facility acts as a giant physical water battery.
A water battery.
Yeah. When the solar farms in Gujarat are producing excess power during the peak of the day, that extra electricity is used to pump water up a mountain into a higher reservoir in the Northeast.
Okay, so storing the potential energy.
Exactly. Then when the sun drops off in the evening and solar generation plummets, that water is released back down through turbines to instantly generate electricity. It provides the steady, dispatchable power needed to keep the frequency of the entire national grid stable.
It's a massive interconnected system, but you also need the industrial muscle to actually build and manage all of this technology.
You need the brains in manufacturing.
Right. The memo assigns that role to the southern and western states, Karnataka, Telangana, Maharashtra, and Andhra Pradesh.
Each with a specific focus.
Yeah. Karnataka is highlighted for advanced engineering, battery intelligence systems, and the complex software required to link these disparate grid systems.
Telangana is positioned as a battery systems and innovation hub.
While Maharashtra serves as the model for industrial electrification, and then Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh anchor the clean mobility sector, focusing on electric vehicle manufacturing and export-linked clean tech.
By decentralizing the energy grid, based entirely on local natural resources and existing industrial strengths, the nation becomes incredibly resilient.
It's spread out.
Exactly. If one region faces an issue, be it a natural disaster or a localized grid failure, the entire national economy doesn't immediately collapse. Furthermore, it forces a highly efficient use of resources.
You aren't fighting nature.
Right. You aren't trying to force a massive solar farm into a mountainous rain zone or a hydro project into an arid plain. You are working with the geography.
But implementing this blueprint introduces a massive real-world dilemma.
You land.
Land. India is a heavily populated country with intense agricultural needs to maintain that food security we discussed earlier. You cannot just pave over fertile farmland to build these massive solar parks.
If you do, you're simply trading an energy crisis for a food crisis.
Exactly. The author is highly aware of that friction. The text states explicitly that the pursuit of energy sovereignty must not become a fresh land conflict problem.
Policymakers cannot casually speak of unused land in a country as densely populated and agriculturally active as India.
To navigate that, the memo lays out a strict rule for land acquisition. The very first priority must be government wasteland, degraded or highly saline land, and reclaimed industrial or mining land.
But the text also pushes for creative spatial solutions.
Yeah, it advocates for utilizing canal top and canal bank corridors, reservoir-based floating solar arrays, and heavily leveraging massive industrial rooftops, logistics hubs, and existing transport corridors.
The fundamental goal is to build out this colossal infrastructure without displacing local communities or threatening agricultural production.
So we have the geographic generation strategy and a framework to manage the land.
This raises an important question, though.
The battery.
Right. Even with the pumped storage hydro in the Northeast, the sheer volume of power moving through this proposed grid requires a massive leap in chemical battery storage. India cannot become energy sovereign if it is completely reliant on other nations for the advanced chemistry cells that make up modern batteries.
The sources dive deep into this battery equation. The memo cites the Ministry of Heavy Industries ACC Battery Storage PLI scheme.
Production-linked incentive.
Right. For context, PLI is a government program designed to boost domestic manufacturing. This specific program has a target of building 50 gigawatt-hours of domestic advanced chemistry cell manufacturing capacity.
To put that scale into perspective, 50 gigawatt-hours is enough capacity to power millions of electric vehicles. It's a massive industrial undertaking.
And the text notes that 40 gigawatt-hours have already been awarded under this scheme.
That indicates the policy foundation is already being laid. The challenge now is execution. And just like the power generation itself, the text argues that the battery and storage architecture needs to be distributed.
Across the states we mentioned.
Yes. The author suggests Gujarat for large-scale materials and chemical processing, Tamil Nadu for EV-linked battery manufacturing, Telangana for the actual storage systems, and Karnataka for the advanced electronics and software that manage the charging and discharging of those batteries.
Managing the grid is one thing, but energy sovereignty fundamentally changes how a nation moves. You cannot speak seriously of national security while your entire transportation network is structurally dependent on imported diesel and petrol.
The transport sector is the big vulnerability.
The blueprint pushes hard for the electrification of transport, but it makes a crucial distinction. Yes, consumer passenger cars matter, but electrifying buses, heavy freight fleets, major logistics corridors, rail-linked freight systems, and port-linked transport matters significantly more.
It's about the physical economy.
Exactly. If you electrify the heavy logistics and freight network, you effectively insulate the core physical economy from global oil price shocks.
That insulation is the ultimate economic prize. If a supply chain disruption sends the price of a barrel of oil skyrocketing, an electrified freight network powered by domestic solar and wind ensures that the cost of moving goods within India doesn't suddenly double.
Which protects the population from sudden, severe inflation.
Right.
So, what does this all mean? This transitions us into what the author views as the broader impact of this entire endeavor. Beyond just keeping the lights on and the trucks moving, the blueprint frames this transition as a massive domestic economic multiplier.
It is positioned as the primary engine for Viksit Bharat,
Which translates to develop India.
Consider the massive amount of national wealth that currently flows out of India simply to purchase imported fuels. A sovereign energy mission of this scale keeps that capital inside the country, circulating within the domestic economy.
But the text also addresses a very modern economic anxiety. The fear that artificial intelligence will lead to massive job displacement.
It's a huge concern globally right now.
It is. But the author makes a fascinating counter-argument to that fear. An energy sovereignty mission on this scale creates massive, localized physical infrastructure and engineering jobs.
Jobs you can't outsource to an algorithm.
Exactly. We're talking about solar panel manufacturing, advanced battery chemistry, high voltage grid infrastructure construction, electric mobility maintenance, and complex physical logistics. These are hands-on, geographically anchored jobs that artificial intelligence simply cannot replace. You cannot outsource the physical construction of a wind turbine off the coast of Gujarat to a generative AI model.
And because the vast majority of the energy produced would be consumed domestically by Indian households, farms, factories, and the growing digital infrastructure, this new industrial base wouldn't have to depend primarily on the whims of foreign buyers.
It's an internal ecosystem.
Yes, it creates an internal economic ecosystem that is naturally insulated from foreign tariffs, global demand shocks, and external competitive pressures. It's a self-reinforcing loop. Domestic supply chains, domestic skills, and domestic consumption all feeding and protecting each other.
Now, if we step back from the raw economics for a second, the text offers an incredibly deep historical analysis that really reframes the entire conversation around energy.
The part about the history of conflicts.
Yes. The author makes a profound observation about human conflict, arguing that many wars and imperial conquests that appear to be purely political on the surface are actually driven by the desperate need to control a scarce, concentrated commodity.
The sources provide three very powerful historical examples to back this up. First, the Indigo Revolt of 1859 to 1860 in Bengal.
Which was deeply tied to coercive colonial cultivation practices of a single highly valued dye.
Right. Second, the text points to the Dutch control of the Banda Islands in the 17th century. That brutal colonization was driven almost entirely by a desire to maintain an absolute global monopoly on nutmeg.
Because at the time, it only grew on those specific islands.
Exactly. Finally, the Opium Wars arose from Britain's determination to violently expand a highly lucrative, concentrated drug trade into China.
In case after case, extreme domination and conflict attach themselves to the control of a concentrated resource. And the author applies this historical lens to our modern era, arguing that fossil fuels are the ultimate concentrated resource.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, for over a century, oil routes, pipelines, and shipping lanes have been the center of global geopolitical conflict simply because oil and gas are only found in specific, concentrated geographic pockets.
If a resource is concentrated, it can be blockaded, it can be sanctioned, or conquered.
Which leads to what the author calls the ultimate moral irony of our age. Nature has distributed sunlight, wind, and river systems far more widely and equitably than geopolitics ever distributed oil and gas.
That's a great point.
The author argues that fossil fuels naturally cause choke points and wars precisely because they are concentrated. Transitioning to renewable energy distributed widely across a nation's geography could literally change the global structure of peace.
The structure of peace, that's a powerful phrase.
Now, the text isn't claiming this will usher in a utopia. Human ambition, territorial disputes, and political rivalries will always exist.
Right.
But achieving energy sovereignty would remove one of the major structural incentives for coercion and resource-driven military instability.
It's a massive paradigm shift. You're not just changing how you power a factory, you're changing the underlying geopolitical incentives for conflict.
But a vision of this magnitude requires actionable, immediate steps.
Absolutely. The policy memo doesn't just philosophize about the structure of peace, it delivers a literal 90-day playbook for the prime minister and policymakers.
It gives us an incredible insider's view of how top-level statecraft is actually structured.
It really does. The memo outlines a national energy sovereignty initiative built on 5 core elements that the author argues must be executed rapidly to set the foundation.
Let's unpack those 5 elements.
Okay. The first directly addresses the geography we discussed earlier. The memo calls for the formal identification of state-wise renewable and storage zones in close partnership with state governments.
It's about taking that geographic theory and putting the map into binding, actionable policy.
Element 2 tackles the land dilemma. The directive is to prioritize government-controlled, low-conflict land, and critically to physically pre-clear it both legally and administratively.
Anyone familiar with infrastructure development knows the nightmare of litigation and environmental disputes. By pre-clearing the land, the government ensures these massive projects aren't stalled in years of bureaucratic limbo.
Element 3 is arguably the most crucial from a practical standpoint. Infrastructure funding. The memo stresses that transmission and storage must be funded in advance, not as an afterthought.
We've seen examples globally where massive solar parks were built, but the power had to be curtailed, essentially thrown away, because the grid infrastructure wasn't there to transport the electricity.
You cannot build a massive solar array and then wait 5 years for the wires to connect it to the cities.
The grid must precede or parallel the generation.
Element 4 focuses entirely on the human element, specifically the workforce. The text calls for the immediate alignment of the ITIs, the Industrial Training Institutes, along with polytechnics and engineering colleges across the country.
The curriculum needs to be specifically tailored to train the workforce required for this exact mission.
You need a massive influx of technicians and engineers trained in solar deployment, advanced battery chemistry, EV systems maintenance, and grid modernization.
You have to build the brains and the hands that will actually construct and maintain the infrastructure.
Finally, Element 5 cuts through the bureaucratic red tape. The author calls for the creation of single-window, time-bound approvals for these specific sovereignty projects while still maintaining strict, non-negotiable ecological and social safeguards.
It's about speed without sacrificing environmental integrity.
And to drive all of this, the memo has one immediate, urgent recommendation. Constitute a Prime Minister-led task force within 90 days.
The goal isn't to build the infrastructure in 90 days, but to prepare the exact roadmap, align the ministries, and officially launch this nation-building mission from the highest level of government.
It has been an incredible journey we've taken today through these sources. We started with the very real, very present danger of geopolitical vulnerability. The terrifying idea that a supply chain issue halfway around the world could crash a domestic economy.
And we've walked through a sweeping, geographically tailored vision of Indian energy independence.
A vision that utilizes the deserts for solar power, the extensive coastlines for wind, and the mountains for hydro balancing, all while domesticating the complex supply chains of battery storage and electric mobility.
For you listening, it is vital to remember the sheer scale of the shift being proposed in these documents. The sources make a highly compelling case that energy is no longer just a utility bill you pay every month.
Or an environmental checkbox that a corporation needs to tick for good PR.
Yeah, exactly. In the 21st century, energy is the ultimate measure of a nation's true independence. A nation that controls its power generation, controls its economic destiny.
It's a profound realization, and the text leaves us with so much to unpack regarding how the modern world operates. So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds entirely on the ideas we've explored today.
Think about the geopolitical map.
Right. If massive nations like Bharat successfully decentralize their power generation and achieve total energy sovereignty, what happens to traditional geopolitical alliances?
It changes everything.
For a century, foreign policy has been dictated by the need to secure oil. If the world no longer needs to fiercely guard shipping lanes in the Middle East or negotiate complex fossil fuel treaties, do we enter a new era of fragmented global isolationism?
Or do we enter a completely new kind of global cooperation?
One based on shared technology and grid integration rather than the extraction of shared resources. Think about that next time you flip a light switch.